Everyone told her to leave. Her mother, her sisters. She stayed anyway. She believed in for better or worse. What she didn't know was that worse would cost her every child she never got to hold, and that the man who broke her body would replace her with the one person she trusted most. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. To understand the blood that stained the walls of 1847 Maple Ridge Drive on that March morning in 2019, you have to go back further than the crime scene photographs and the 911 calls. You have to go back to a small two-story house on a tree-in street in Savannah, Georgia, where a baby girl named Grace Marie Bennett took her first breath on April 3, 1985. She was the fourth daughter born to William and Dorothy Bennett. And from the moment she arrived, everyone said she was different. Not difficult, different, special, different. The kind of child who noticed when someone was hurting before they said a word. William Bennett worked the docks at the port of Savannah for 35 years, loading and unloading cargo ships in the Georgia heat until his hands were permanently calloused and his back permanently bent. He was a quiet man, stern in the way Southern fathers often are, but never cruel. He believed a man provided and a woman nurtured. And he raised his daughters to understand that marriage was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Dorothy Bennett spent her days caring for elderly patients as a home health aide, wiping brows and holding hands and whispering prayers over people in their final hours. Her faith wasn't something she practiced on Sundays alone. It was the air she breathed, the lens through which she saw every moment of her life. The Bennett sisters came in 4-year intervals like clockwork. Linda arrived in 1978, the responsible one who kept everyone in line. Carol came in 1980, the outspoken one who said what everyone else was thinking. Evelyn followed in 1982, the peacemaker who smoothed over every argument. And then there was Grace, the baby born when Dorothy thought her childbearing years were behind her. From the time she could walk, Grace was collecting broken things and trying to fix them. Stray cats with matted fur, birds with damaged wings, toys her sisters had discarded. She brought them all home, nursed them back to health, and cried when she couldn't save them. Her sisters teased her about it, called her the family bleeding heart. But Dorothy saw something else in her youngest daughter. She saw a gift for caring that would either save Grace or destroy her. By the time Grace started school, her role in the family had solidified. She was the helper, the one who stayed up late with a sick sister. The one who remembered everyone's favorite meal, the one who never asked for anything because she was too busy giving. Her teachers wrote in her report cards that Grace Bennett had an extraordinary capacity for empathy. What none of them could have predicted was that the same empathy that made her exceptional would one day make her a target, and that a man would exploit that vulnerability until there was nothing left of her to save. Before we continue this story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. What you're about to witness is a story that could save a life, and I don't want anyone to miss it. Now, let's go back to Savannah. Every Sunday morning, without exception, the Bennett family piled into their wood-paneled station wagon and drove to Greater Hope Baptist Church on the east side of Savannah. William wore his one good suit, Dorothy wore her Sunday hat, and the 4 girls sat in the pew with their hands folded and their eyes forward. Grace sang in the youth choir from the time she was 8 until she graduated high school, her voice rising with the others in hymns about faith and forgiveness and the sacred bond of marriage. The church taught that divorce was failure, that marriage was a covenant with God, and that a woman's duty was to stand by her husband through every storm. Grace absorbed these lessons like water into dry soil, never questioning whether the soil could hold that much weight. Dorothy Bennett had her own way of reinforcing these teachings at home. She would sit her daughters down at the kitchen table and tell them stories about women who had made their marriages work through sheer determination. She would say things like, "A wife's job is to make a marriage work, and men have their struggles, but women have patience." She warned them never to air dirty laundry outside the family, never to let the neighbors know when times were hard, never to give anyone reason to gossip. These weren't suggestions in the Bennett household. They were commandments passed down from mother to daughter, like recipes and remedies, and the proper way to fold a fitted sheet. But there was one story Dorothy didn't tell very often. And when she did, she told it with her lips pressed thin, and her eyes looking somewhere far away. Her sister Clara had married a man who drank and raged, who threw things when he was angry, and threw worse things when he was drunk. Clara stayed with that man for 22 years. And when she finally left, the family was divided. Some said Clara was brave. Others said Clara was weak for not trying harder. Grace was 14 years old when she overheard her grandmother say those words at a family gathering. She gave up too easily. That's what Grandma Rose said. And something in Grace's young mind recorded that statement like scripture. Leaving was weakness. Staying was strength. A real woman didn't walk away just because things got hard. That night, Grace wrote in her journal with the purple pen she kept hidden under her mattress. The entry was short, just 2 sentences, but those sentences would echo through the next 2 decades of her life. She wrote, "I'll never be like Aunt Clara. If I get married, I'll make it work because I'll be strong enough." Those words would become a prison. The girl writing them in purple ink would become a woman trapped inside them, unable to escape until it was far too late. Grace Bennett walked across the stage at Beach High School in the spring of 2003 with a diploma in her hand and a future that seemed to stretch out bright and promising before her. Her classmates had voted her most likely to help others, which surprised no one who knew her. She had spent her teenage years volunteering at soup kitchens, tutoring younger students, and organizing charity drives for causes most people her age had never heard of. Her guidance counselor told her she had the temperament for nursing. And Grace knew immediately that this was what she was meant to do. She wanted to spend her life caring for people, easing their pain, holding their hands when no one else would. Savannah State University accepted her into their nursing program that fall, and Grace threw herself into her studies with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She worked part-time at Magnolia Gardens nursing home while carrying a full course load. And the residents there adored her. They called her Sunshine because she always arrived with a smile, even on the days when her own life was falling apart. She remembered their birthdays, their grandchildren's names, the stories they told about the wars they'd fought and the loves they'd lost. The nursing home director wrote her a recommendation letter that described Grace as the kind of nurse who treats every patient like family. It was the highest compliment anyone had ever paid her. She graduated in 2007 with a Bachelor of Science in nursing and honors that made her mother cry at the ceremony. Her first job was in the emergency department at Memorial Health University Medical Center, one of the busiest hospitals in Savannah. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts that stretched into 14. Patients who screamed and patients who died and patients who grabbed her arm and begged her not to leave them alone. Some of her fellow nurses burned out within months, but Grace stayed. She stayed late, picked up extra shifts, and never complained about The overtime. Her supervisor described her as calm under pressure, a natural leader, someone who could handle anything. What her supervisor didn't see was that Grace's ability to handle anything came from the same place as her inability to ask for help. She had been trained since childhood to give, and to never expect anything in return. By the time she was 24 years old, Grace Bennett had a stable career, a close family, and a faith that anchored her to something larger than herself. She had no red flags, no warning signs, no reason to expect that her life was about to take a turn toward darkness. She was, by every measure, a success story in progress. The most dangerous chapter, however, was still waiting to be written. If you asked anyone who knew Grace Bennett to describe her in a single word, they would all say the same thing. Helper, fixer, caretaker. She was the woman who showed up at your door with a casserole when you were sick. Who remembered your anniversary when your own husband forgot, who listened to your problems for hours without ever mentioning her own. Her sister, Linda, would later testify at trial about this quality, her voice breaking as she tried to explain something that was both beautiful and tragic. She said Grace couldn't leave a stray dog on the street. If something was broken, she had to fix it. That was her blessing and her curse. Those words would hang in the courtroom like smoke, impossible to clear away. What made Grace such a gifted nurse was the same thing that made her vulnerable to a certain kind of man. She believed that everyone deserved second chances. She believed that love could heal wounds that logic said were fatal. She believed that if she just tried hard enough, cared deeply enough, sacrificed completely enough, she could save anyone from anything. This belief had served her well in the emergency room, where patients arrived broken and left whole because of people like her. But outside the hospital, the rules were different. Outside the hospital, there were people who didn't want to be saved. There were people who wanted to be served, and Grace couldn't tell the difference. She rarely asked for help herself. In fact, she found the very idea uncomfortable, almost shameful. Asking for help meant admitting she couldn't handle something, and Grace had been raised to handle everything. Her mother had handled a husband who worked long hours and came home exhausted. Her grandmother had handled raising 6 children during the Depression. The Bennett women handled things. They didn't burden others with their struggles. They certainly didn't complain. Grace had absorbed this lesson so completely that by the time she was an adult, she didn't even recognize her own needs anymore. She was so focused on what everyone else required that she had forgotten she was a person with requirements of her own. At 24, Grace had dated a little, but nothing serious. One boyfriend in college who was nice enough, but not quite right. A few first dates that didn't lead to second ones. She wasn't desperate for love or lonely in a way that made her reckless. She was simply waiting for the right person. The person who would appreciate everything she had to offer. She wanted marriage and children and a life that looked like her parents' life. Stable and loving and built on faith. What Grace didn't understand was that predators recognize helpers from across a crowded room. They can smell the willingness to sacrifice. And one predator in particular was about to find her. Now, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far into the story, type "I'm still here" so I know who's really paying attention. Let's see who's watching and where you're all coming from. This story is just getting started. The opportunity came in early 2009, and Grace knew immediately that she had to take it. Grady Memorial hospital in Atlanta was offering positions in their trauma unit, and the salary was nearly double what she was making in Savannah. It was a chance to advance her career, to challenge herself in one of the busiest hospitals in the Southeast, to prove that she could handle anything the medical world threw at her. Her family supported the move, though Dorothy cried when Grace packed up her apartment and Linda helped her load boxes into a rental truck. They promised to call every week to visit on holidays, to stay as close as geography would allow. None of them realized that the 4-hour drive between Savannah and Atlanta would eventually become a canyon that Grace couldn't cross. She found a small apartment in Decatur, a suburb east of Atlanta, where the rent was reasonable and the neighborhood was safe. Her new position at Grady was everything she'd hoped for and more. The trauma unit moved at a pace that made her old job look leisurely, with gunshot wounds and car accidents and medical emergencies arriving in waves that never seemed to end. Grace thrived in this environment. She liked being busy, liked being needed. Liked collapsing into bed at night so exhausted that she didn't have time to think about whether she was happy. Happiness was a luxury she would pursue later when she had time. The distance from her family was harder than she'd expected. In Savannah, she could drive to her mother's house in 20 minutes. She could meet her sisters for lunch, attend Sunday services at Greater Hope, feel the safety net of people who had known her since birth. In Atlanta, she was starting from scratch. Her co-workers were friendly but not friends. Her neighbors waved but didn't linger. She went to a new church but didn't feel the same sense of belonging. For the first time in her life, Grace was truly on her own, and she didn't realize how much she had depended on her family's presence until it was gone. She focused on her work, picked up extra shifts, volunteered for the assignments no one else wanted. She was too busy to be lonely. Or at least that's what she kept telling herself. What Grace couldn't know was that her isolation made her the perfect target for someone who specialized in finding women without support systems. The independence she was so proud of would become the weapon used against her. The loneliness she refused to acknowledge would be the door through which destruction entered. In 6 months, she would meet a man who would see everything she was trying to hide and use it to take control of her life completely. September 2009 arrived in Atlanta with the last gasp of summer heat and the first whisper of autumn cool. Grace had been in the city for 8 months now, long enough to know her way around. Not long enough to feel at home. She was tired that Labor Day weekend, bone-deep tired from back-to-back shifts and the relentless demands of the trauma unit. When her coworker invited her to a barbecue in East Atlanta, Grace almost said no. She had laundry to do, groceries to buy, sleep to catch up on. But something made her say yes. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the desire to feel normal for a few hours. Maybe it was fate, if you believe in that sort of thing. The barbecue was at a friend of a friend's house, a backyard gathering with music playing from a portable speaker, and the smell of charcoal and grilled meat hanging in the air. Grace arrived alone, knowing only the coworker who had invited her, feeling slightly awkward in the way you feel at parties, where everyone else seems to have history you're not part of. She got a plate of food, found a spot in the shade, and prepared to make the kind of small talk that would get her through the next few hours until she could politely leave. That's when she saw him. Or rather, that's when he saw her. He was standing across the yard with a beer in his hand and a smile on his face. And when their eyes met, he started walking toward her like he'd been waiting for her to show up. He was handsome in a rough-edged way, with broad shoulders and confident posture, and the kind of easy charm that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He introduced himself with a handshake that lasted just a beat too long and a voice that seemed designed to Make women lean in closer. His name was Vincent Hollister. He was 26 years old. An HVAC technician from Augusta in Atlanta for work. He asked Grace questions about herself, real questions, not the surface-level stuff most people traded at parties. He wanted to know about her job, her family, her dreams. He listened when she talked. Really. Listened in a way that made her feel seen for the first time in months. By the time the sun went down, they had been talking for 3 hours, and Grace hadn't thought about her loneliness once. He asked for her number before she left. She gave it without hesitation. She drove home smiling, not knowing that the charming stranger at the barbecue had already begun to calculate how to isolate her. The courtship had officially begun, and Grace was walking straight into a trap that would take her 7 years to escape. Vincent Allen Hollister came into the world on November 17, 1982 in Augusta, Georgia. The only child of Bernard and Cynthia Hollister. From the outside, the Hollisters looked like any other working-class family in their neighborhood. Bernard had served in the army during the Gulf War, and Cynthia taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. They had a modest house with a chain-link fence and a dog named Rusty, and all the trappings of normal American life. But behind closed doors, the Hollister household was ruled by something darker than anyone on the outside could see. Bernard Hollister came back from the war, a different man than the one who left. He didn't talk about what he'd seen overseas, and no one asked. But whatever it was, it lived inside him like a second heartbeat, driving him toward the bottle with increasing desperation as the years went on. He wasn't physically violent with Cynthia, not in the way that left visible marks, but his rages were legendary within those walls. He would scream until his voice gave out, throw furniture across rooms, disappear for days at a time, and then return with apologies and flowers and promises that things would be different. Cynthia accepted these cycles as the price of marriage. She covered for him when he missed work, made excuses to the neighbors, told young Vincent that Daddy was just tired, that Daddy loved them, that everything was going to be fine. Vincent watched and learned. He learned that anger was acceptable as long as you apologized afterward. He learned that women forgave and men were forgiven. He learned that alcohol was how men dealt with their pain, and that whatever happened while you were drinking could be blamed on the bottle rather than the man holding it. These lessons sank into his developing brain like roots into soil, invisible but foundational, shaping everything that would grow from them later. When Vincent was 12, Cynthia finally found the courage to file for divorce. She had reached her breaking point after Bernard smashed their television during a football game and the glass nearly hit Vincent's face. The divorce was ugly and prolonged, but Cynthia got custody and Bernard got visitation. Vincent lived with his mother during the week, but spent weekends with his father, and those weekends became the highlight of his young life. He idolized Bernard despite everything. Or maybe because of it. Bernard let him stay up late, bought him things Cynthia couldn't afford, treated him like a buddy instead of a child. The fact that Bernard was usually drunk during these visits didn't register as a problem. It registered as freedom. Bernard Hollister died of liver failure in 2001 when Vincent was 19 years old. His last words to his son were a plea and a prophecy. He said, "Take care of your mother and be better than me." Vincent would fail spectacularly at both. If you're finding value in this story, I need you to do something important. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you love. This isn't just entertainment. This is a warning about what can happen when the signs are missed. Share it with your sisters, your daughters, your friends. It might just save their lives. The death of Bernard Hollister left a hole in Vincent's life that he never learned how to fill. He was at his father's bedside in that Augusta hospital when the machines flatlined, holding a hand that had thrown so many things in anger, but had never quite struck him directly. Vincent didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't cry in the weeks that followed. He went back to work the very next day, installing air conditioning units in office buildings. Like nothing had happened, like his world hadn't just shifted on its axis. His co-workers thought he was handling it well. His mother thought he was being strong. The truth was that Vincent had simply locked his grief inside a room he would never open. And the pressure of that containment would leak out in other ways for the rest of his life. He had graduated from Augusta Technical College the year before with a certification in HVAC repair, a practical trade that paid well and kept him busy. Vincent was good at the work. He could diagnose a broken compressor by sound alone. Could fix problems that had stumped other technicians. Could charm customers into signing service contracts with a smile and a handshake. His bosses loved him. His clients requested him by name. On paper, Vincent Hollister was a success story, a young man who had overcome a difficult childhood to build something solid and respectable. But the nights told a different story. The drinking that had started socially in his late teens became habitual by his early 20s. After his father's death, it became necessary. Vincent couldn't sleep without a few beers to quiet his mind. He couldn't relax without something stronger on the weekends. He justified it by saying he was nothing like Bernard, that he could control it, that he only drank to unwind after long days of physical labor. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing. By the time he was 24, Vincent Hollister was what professionals call a functional alcoholic. He never missed work. He never got arrested. He never did anything that would show up on a background check or raise red flags to casual observers. But his girlfriend saw a different side. They saw the mood swings that came without warning. The jealousy that flared at innocent conversations. The way his personality shifted after the third drink, like someone had flipped a switch inside him. They saw glimpses of Bernard Hollister and his son, though none of them knew Bernard well enough to make the connection. Most of these women left before things got too bad. They trusted their instincts, made their excuses, and escaped before the door closed completely behind them. But Vincent was patient. He was learning. He was waiting for someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who had been taught that leaving was the greater sin. That someone was coming. Her name was Grace Brittany Morrison, and she was the first woman to see exactly what Vincent Hollister was capable of becoming. They met in Augusta in 2002. When Vincent was 20 and Brittany was 19. Both of them young enough to mistake intensity for passion and control for care. Brittany was drawn to Vincent's confidence, his easy smile, the way he made her feel like the center of the universe when his attention was focused on her. For the first year, things were good. Good enough that she moved into his apartment. Good enough that she started imagining a future with him. The change came gradually, the way these things always do. Vincent started asking where she was going and who she was with. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower, questioning her about male coworkers, accusing her of flirting when she was just being friendly. In 3 months, until her clothes hung off her frame like they belonged to someone else. She slept 14-16 hours a day. Escaping into unconsciousness because being awake meant being aware of what her life had become. She stopped leaving the house except when absolutely necessary. She stopped answering the phone when her mother called. She stopped responding to her sister's texts. She became a ghost haunting her own home. Visible but not present. Breathing but not living. Vincent's abuse evolved during this period. The physical violence decreased because there was no need for it anymore. Grace was too broken to resist. Too defeated to defy. Instead, the psychological torture intensified. He criticized everything about her appearance, her cooking, her housekeeping, her existence. He called her worthless and pathetic and not even a real woman anymore. He told her no one else would ever want her, that she was damaged goods, that she was lucky he stayed with her at all. The cruelest words came at night when Vincent was drunk and his tongue was loosened by whiskey. He told her he should have married someone who could give him a family. He asked what the point was of being married to her now. He looked at her with contempt so profound that Grace felt it on her skin. Like sunburn, impossible to escape. She internalized every word. She believed she had failed as a woman, as a wife, as a human being. She believed she deserved his cruelty because she had not been strong enough to carry his children, not good enough to make him happy, not worthy of love or kindness or basic human decency. The voice inside her head that once told her she was valuable had been replaced by Vincent's voice telling her she was nothing. Her family tried to reach her. Dorothy called and called, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. Linda and Carol and Evelyn took turns driving to Atlanta, but Grace rarely answered the door. When she did, she performed normally for a few minutes before retreating back into the darkness. Her sister Linda would later say they lost her long before they lost her. By the time Grace finally broke, the woman they had known was already gone. Janine Michelle Lawson had been Grace's closest friend since the first week of nursing school at Savannah State University. They met during freshman orientation in 2003. Two small-town Georgia girls overwhelmed by textbooks and anatomy labs and the pressure of pursuing a career that would demand everything they had. They studied together, cried together, celebrated together when the grades came back better than expected. By graduation, they were closer than some sisters. Janine was everything Grace was not. Where Grace was quiet, Janine was loud. Where Grace worried, Janine laughed. Where Grace held back, Janine charged forward. They complemented each other perfectly. Two halves of a friendship that neither wanted to give up even after life pulled them in different directions. Janine had moved to Atlanta for a pediatric nursing position around the same time Grace transferred to Grady, and they had promised to stay close despite their busy schedules. She was Grace's maid of honor at the wedding in 2011. Her toast had been short and sincere. She said she had never seen Grace so happy. She told Vincent to take care of her girl. She meant every word. She had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. No idea that the blushing bride she hugged at the reception was already learning to hide bruises and make excuses and protect a man who deserved no protection. After the hysterectomy in 2014, Janine became Grace's primary support. She visited more frequently than anyone else, bringing food and company in the kind of comfortable silence that only old friends can share. She sat with Grace through the worst days. The days when getting out of bed felt impossible. The days when Grace stared at the wall for hours without speaking. Janine encouraged her to return to work, to see a therapist, to do something beyond existing in that house with Vincent. Vincent tolerated Janine's presence. During these visits, even seemed to welcome it. He was charming when she came by, helpful and attentive in ways that made Janine think maybe the marriage wasn't as bad as Grace's depression suggested. He made jokes that made Janine laugh. He asked about her life, her work, her dating struggles. Grace noticed the way Vincent looked at Janine during these visits, the way his eyes lingered a beat too long, the way. His smile changed when Janine walked into the room. She wrote in her journal one night in December 2015 that she was being paranoid, that Janine would never betray her. She wrote that Vincent was just being nice to her friend, that she was imagining things, that her depression was making her see threats where none existed. Grace was wrong, the threat was real, and it was already taking shape in texts and calls and secret meetings that Grace knew nothing about. Her best friend was about to become her greatest enemy. The affair between Vincent Hollister and Janine Lawson began not with passion, but with manipulation. Vincent started texting Janine in early 2016. Casual messages at first, check-ins about Grace's mental state that seemed innocent enough. He told Janine he was worried about his wife, that she was pulling away from him, that he didn't know how to help her. Janine responded with sympathy and advice. Glad to be useful. Glad that Vincent seemed to care so much about her friend. The messages became more frequent, more personal. Vincent started sharing his own struggles, the version of his struggles that painted him as a victim rather than a perpetrator. He told Janine that Grace was cold and distant, that she refused to touch him, that she blamed him for things he couldn't control. He said he felt alone in his own marriage, trapped with a woman who wouldn't let him in. Janine found herself feeling sorry for him. She found herself thinking that Grace didn't appreciate what she had. The first time they met alone was for coffee just to talk. The second time was dinner at a restaurant across town. The third time was a hotel room, and whatever lines existed before that night were erased completely. Janine reasoned that the marriage was basically over anyway. She reasoned that Grace wouldn't miss what she had already discarded. She reasoned that Vincent was a good man who deserved better than what he was getting. These were lies, of course, convenient lies that allowed Janine to sleep at night to look at herself in the mirror without seeing a monster. She had no idea that the cold, distant wife Vincent described was actually a traumatized abuse victim. She had no idea that Grace's inability to be intimate came from years of violence, not indifference. She had no idea that everything Vincent told her was designed to manipulate her into becoming his next conquest while destroying the woman she claimed as her best friend. The affair continued throughout 2016. They met at hotels and restaurants in Janine's apartment. Sometimes they were together while Grace sat alone in the house on Maple Ridge Drive, sleeping away the hours, unaware that her husband and her best friend were tangled in sheets 20 minutes away. Janine started visiting Grace less frequently. When she did visit, she was awkward and distracted, unable to meet Grace's eyes for more than a few seconds. Grace noticed the change, but didn't understand it. She thought Janine was pulling away because she was tired of dealing with a depressed friend. She thought she was losing her best friend the same way she had lost everything else. Through some failure of her own, she couldn't identify. The betrayal was already complete. The two people Grace trusted most were destroying what little she had left, and she had no idea. Vincent Hollister filed for divorce in the spring of 2017, and the announcement blindsided Grace completely. She had spent 7 years enduring his violence, forgiving his cruelty, sacrificing everything she had to make their marriage work. And now he was leaving. After everything she had suffered, after everything she had lost, he was the one walking away. He came home one evening in March and sat her down in the living room with the same businesslike tone he might use to discuss a plumbing repair. He said, "I want a divorce. This isn't working." No emotion in his voice. No sign that these Words were anything more than a schedule change or a grocery list item. Grace begged. She hated herself for begging. But she did it anyway. She asked him to reconsider, to try counseling, to give her another chance to be the wife he wanted. She reminded him of their vows, for better or worse, the promises they had made in front of God and family. Vincent's response cut through every defense she had left. He said, "You can't give me what I need. You can't give me a family. What's the point? What's the point?" 3 words that summarized how Vincent had seen their marriage all along. She was useful only as long as she could produce children. Now that her usefulness had ended, so had his interest. The divorce proceedings were quick because Grace didn't fight them. She had no money for lawyers, no energy for battle, no belief that she deserved anything better than what she was getting. Vincent let her keep the house because it was easier than arguing over it. He wanted clean and fast and final, and Grace gave him all 3. The paperwork was signed in August 2017. Grace sat in the courthouse with shaking hands and signed away 7 years of marriage, 3 dead children, and any remaining belief that love could be trusted. Vincent shook her hand like she was a business associate he was parting ways with. He said, "Good luck, Grace. I hope you find whatever you're looking for." He said it like he was being kind. He walked out of the courthouse and drove directly to Janine's apartment where he had been spending most of his nights for months. Grace didn't know about Janine yet. She didn't know that the divorce wasn't just rejection but calculated betrayal. She drove home to an empty house and sat in the silence and thought that at least the abuse was over. At least she was free. At least the worst was behind her. The worst was not behind her. The worst was still to come, and it would arrive within a matter of weeks, shattering whatever was left of the woman Grace used to be. Grace discovered the affair in September 2017, 2 weeks after her divorce was finalized. She was scrolling through social media, trying to reconnect with a world she had withdrawn from, when she saw a photograph that stopped her heart. A mutual friend had posted pictures from a restaurant, and in the background of one image, almost obscured by other diners, she saw Vincent. He was sitting at a table with a woman, leaning close. Intimate in a way that married couples rarely are after years together. Grace zoomed in on the photograph and felt her world tilt sideways. The woman was Janine. Grace called Janine's phone. Immediately. No answer. She called again, voicemail. She sent a text that said, "We need to talk," and watched the screen for a response that never came. Her body knew the truth before her mind accepted it. She got in her car and drove to Janine's apartment complex, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her breath coming in short gasps that felt like drowning. Vincent's truck was parked in Janine's lot. Grace sat in her car across the street and stared at that truck for 30 minutes. She watched the lights in Janine's apartment window. She watched shadows move behind the curtains. She watched everything she thought she knew collapse into rubble around her. They had been together before the divorce. Maybe for months. Maybe for the entire year of 2016, while Grace was sleeping away her depression, while she was grieving her children, while she was blaming herself for every failure of the marriage. Vincent hadn't left because she was barren. He had left because he already had someone else. And that someone was her best friend, her maid of honor, the woman she had trusted more than anyone except her own sisters. Grace called Carol that night, the first genuine conversation she had initiated with her family in years. Her voice was hollow when she spoke. She said, "He was with Janine the whole time." Carol didn't understand at first, and Grace had to Explain. Vincent and Janine together. An affair that had been happening while Grace was drowning. The betrayal layered on betrayal until Grace couldn't separate them anymore. Vincent had beaten her for 7 years, killed 3 children inside her body, taken her ability to ever be a mother, convinced her she was worthless, divorced her for being damaged goods. And all of that had been happening while he was sleeping with her best friend. A fracture opened in Grace's mind that night. Not loud. Not dramatic, just a quiet splintering, like ice giving way beneath too much weight. The fracture spread slowly, invisibly, weakening the structure that held her together. In time, there would be nothing left but pieces, and those pieces would become weapons. The wedding announcement came in March 2018, 7 months after Grace discovered the affair. Vincent and Janine had gotten married in a courthouse ceremony. No guests, no fanfare, just signatures on paper and a photograph posted to social media. Just married, the caption read with a heart emoji and a smile that seemed designed to maximize pain. Grace saw the post and felt a door close inside her mind. Not calm, not peaceful. Final, the kind of finality that comes after you have felt everything and there is nothing left to feel. She started watching their social media obsessively after that. She created fake accounts so she could see their posts even after they blocked her. She screenshotted every photograph, every status update, every comment from well-wishers who had no idea what they were celebrating. She wrote in her journals for hours at a time, documenting their happiness like evidence for a trial that existed only in her mind. The pregnancy announcement came in December 2018, 9 months after the wedding. Janine posted a photograph of herself holding a onesie that said, "Coming soon." And Vincent stood beside her with his hand on her belly and a smile Grace had never seen him wear during their entire marriage. Grace read the announcement and felt the ground shift beneath her. 3 babies. She had lost 3 babies because of Vincent's violence. 3 children who never got to take a breath or open their eyes or feel their mother's arms around them. And now Janine was going to have what Grace never could. The baby would come in summer. Grace would never hold a child of her own. The math was simple. The injustice was absolute. She called Carol one last time, her voice flat and strange. She said Janine was pregnant. Carol tried to comfort her, tried to remind her that she was building a new life, that this didn't change anything for her personally. Grace interrupted. She said, "I lost 3 babies because of him. 3 babies. And she gets to have one." Carol heard something in her sister's voice that scared her. She begged Grace to come home, to let them help her, to not do anything rash. Grace said she had to go and hung up. In the months that followed, Grace stopped working, stopped paying bills, stopped eating regular meals. Neighbors reported seeing her standing in her driveway at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at nothing. In late February 2019, she walked into a gun store in Atlanta and purchased a 9mm handgun. She visited a shooting range twice to practice. The clerk who sold her the weapon would later testify that she seemed calm, polite, nothing unusual at all. But behind that calm exterior, a decision had already been made and there would be no turning back. Grace Hollister woke early on the morning of March 13, 2019 after the first restful sleep she had experienced in months. She showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were clean and pressed. Paying attention to her appearance for the first time since the divorce. She ate breakfast at her kitchen table, eggs and toast and coffee, chewing slowly and deliberately like someone savoring a final meal. The house was clean. She had Spent the previous 3 days scrubbing every surface, organizing every drawer, making sure everything was in its place. The behavior of someone preparing to leave and never return. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Grace got in her car and drove across Atlanta to the apartment complex where Vincent and Janine lived. She parked across the street and watched the building for 20 minutes, noting the cars in the lot, the windows of their unit. The ordinary rhythms of a Wednesday morning in their lives. Then she drove home. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she sent a text message to Janine. The words were calculated to seem conciliatory, the language of someone seeking closure. She wrote, "We should talk. Just us. I want to apologize for how things ended. Can you come to my place tonight?" She added the address even though Janine already knew it. She pressed send and waited. Janine showed Vincent the message when he got home from work. He was suspicious. He said Grace had lost her mind, that Janine shouldn't go anywhere near her. But Janine felt guilty. She had spent 2 years lying to her best friend. 2 years building a life on the ruins of Grace's marriage. She told Vincent that she owed Grace at least this much, that maybe they could all find some peace if they just talked things through. Vincent reluctantly agreed but insisted on being nearby. They decided he would wait in his truck down the street while Janine went inside alone. At 7:30, Grace set 2 glasses of water on the coffee table in her living room. She opened the drawer of the credenza beside the couch and placed her handgun inside within easy reach but out of immediate sight. She sat down on the couch and waited. The clock on the wall ticked through the minutes. 8 o'clock approached. Grace sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She had passed through rage and grief and despair into something beyond all of them, a place where the outcome was already determined, and all that remained was execution. At 7:58, headlights swept across her front window. A car pulled into the driveway. A door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the front porch. The doorbell rang. Grace stood up. She walked to the door and she opened it to find Janine standing there with guilt on her face and a baby growing inside her body. Janine Lawson stepped into Grace's living room with the cautious movements of someone entering unfamiliar territory. She was 20 weeks pregnant. Now, visibly showing her hand drifting to her stomach periodically in the unconscious gesture of expectant mothers. Everywhere. Grace noticed this. Grace noticed everything. They sat down. Janine on the couch and Grace in the chair across from her. Grace offered water. Janine accepted. The glass sat untouched on the coffee table between them while they navigated the first awkward minutes of conversation. Janine talked about the pregnancy, the due date, the nursery they were planning. Grace listened without expression, asking follow-up questions in a voice that revealed nothing. Then Janine said the words she had probably rehearsed on the drive over. She said, "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen this way." She said it with tears in her eyes. Genuine tears. The tears of someone who wanted absolution without earning it. Grace asked a question that changed everything. She asked, "Did you know?" Janine didn't understand. She asked, "Know what?" Grace leaned forward in her chair. Her voice was steady, calm, terrifying in its flatness. She asked, "Did you know what he did to me? Did you know about the babies?" Janine's confusion was genuine. She had no idea what Grace was talking about. She said, "Grace, what babies? What are you saying?" And then Grace told her. She told her everything. The beatings that started in 2011 and never stopped. The kicks to her pregnant stomach, the 3 miscarriages caused by violence, the hysterectomy that resulted from years of trauma to her body. Every detail, every injury, every night spent bleeding and crying and praying for the strength to survive until morning. Janine's face transformed as she listened. The color drained from her skin, her hand pressed against her stomach protectively. She said, "He told me you were cold. He told me you pushed him away. He said the miscarriages were genetic." Grace's response was simple. She said, "And you believed him?" Janine started crying in earnest now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She said she didn't know. She swore she didn't know. She apologized over and over, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and horror and dawning understanding of what she had participated in. Grace watched her cry without sympathy. She said, "You're carrying his baby. The baby I was supposed to have. You're living the life he destroyed to take from me." Janine stood up. She said she should go. She said they could talk more later. She started moving toward the door. Grace reached into the drawer beside her. The gun felt heavier than Grace remembered when she pulled it from the drawer. Janine saw it and froze, her hand still reaching toward the door, her face twisting from grief to terror in the space between heartbeats. She said Grace's name like a prayer, stretching the single syllable into something desperate and pleading. Grace raised the weapon and fired once. The bullet struck Janine in the chest, and she fell backward onto the couch before sliding to the floor. She was still alive, still conscious, her hands pressing against the wound as blood seeped between her fingers. She looked up at Grace with eyes that couldn't comprehend what was happening, and she tried to speak, but only managed a wet, gurgling sound. Outside, Vincent heard the gunshot from his truck parked down the street. He was out of the vehicle and running toward the house before the echo faded. His work boots pounding against the asphalt, his mind racing through possibilities that all ended in horror. He burst through the front door without slowing down and found exactly what he feared most. Janine on the floor, bleeding, Grace standing over her with a gun in her hand. The smell of gunpowder and copper filling the air. Vincent screamed at Grace, demanded to know what she had done, started moving toward Janine with some half-formed idea of saving her. Grace turned the gun toward him, and he stopped. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, everything that had passed between them was visible. The beatings, the babies. The betrayal, 7 years of violence condensed into a single look. Grace said, "You took everything from me." Her voice was calm. Her hands were steady. She fired twice. Vincent fell in the living room, 6 feet from the door. Blood pooling beneath him on the hardwood floor he had helped Grace refinish during that first good year of marriage. He didn't move after he hit the ground. Grace walked back to Janine. Her former best friend was dying, her breath coming in short gasps, her eyes following Grace's movements with fading awareness. Grace knelt beside her and said words that would haunt everyone who heard them later. She said, "I loved you. Like a sister." Then she fired one final shot. The house fell silent. Grace sat down on the floor between the two bodies, the gun still warm in her hand. She didn't call the police. She didn't try to flee. She sat there through the night, waiting for morning, waiting for whatever came next. At 5:30 in the morning, she got in her car and drove south toward Savannah, toward the church where she had been married, toward the place where she had once believed in, for better or worse. The police would find her there, praying in an empty sanctuary, ready to answer for what she had done. Mail carrier Ronald Webb discovered the crime scene at 6:47 on the morning of March 14, 2019. He had been delivering packages to Maple Ridge Drive for 8 years and had never seen anything unusual at the Hollister house. But when he approached the front door that Thursday morning and found it slightly open, when he caught the smell drifting from inside, when he peered through the window and saw the blood, he knew his ordinary day had become something else entirely. The 911 call was logged at 6:52. DeKalb County Police arrived 12 minutes later. What they found inside confirmed Webb's worst fears. 2 bodies. A man near the door. A woman on the floor by the couch. Shell casings scattered across the hardwood. Blood that had dried to a dark rust overnight. The scene told a story of violence, but it didn't tell them who had committed it or why. The homeowner was missing. Grace Hollister's car was gone. Her phone last pinged heading south on Interstate 75 toward Savannah. An all-points bulletin went out across Georgia while forensic teams processed every inch of the house. The gun was found on the kitchen counter, fingerprints matching Grace Hollister. The drawer where she had hidden it was still open. They found her at Greater Hope Baptist Church at 9:45. That morning, she was sitting alone in a pew near the front, her head bowed, her lips moving in silent prayer. When officers approached and told her she was under arrest for the murders of Vincent Hollister and Janine Lawson, she simply stood up. She said 5 words. "I know. I've been waiting." The confession that followed lasted 4 hours. Grace waved her right to an attorney and told Detective Sylvia Tate everything. The marriage, the abuse, the miscarriages, the hysterectomy, the affair, the divorce, the pregnancy announcement that had finally pushed her past the point of endurance. She described the murders in clinical detail without emotion, like she was recounting someone else's actions. She said she wanted them to understand what they had taken from her. She said Vincent was never going to pay for what he did because the law doesn't punish men like him. She said she didn't regret killing him. The only regret she expressed was about Janine, about the fact that Janine didn't know the truth until it was too late, about the baby that died alongside its mother. The evidence recovered from Grace's home told its own story. 14 journals spanning years documenting her mental deterioration. 47 photographs of injuries she had secretly taken and hidden. Medical records that confirmed everything she claimed. Text messages that proved the affair. The prosecution would argue premeditation. The defense would argue something more complicated. The trial was set for February 2020. The trial of Grace Hollister began on February 3, 2020 in a DeKalb County courtroom packed with reporters and spectators and the families of everyone involved. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michelle Cranford, painted Grace as a calculated killer who had planned and executed 2 murders with cold precision. The defense, led by attorney Rachel Goldstein, argued that Grace was not a murderer, but a victim who had finally broken under the weight of unimaginable trauma. The prosecution presented evidence of premeditation. The gun purchased 2 weeks before the killings, the practice sessions at the shooting range, the text message, luring Janine to the house under false pretenses. Cranford stood before the jury and said the words that would define her case. She said abuse does not give anyone the right to become judge, jury, and executioner. She said the law requires justice for all victims, including Vincent and Janine. The defense countered with evidence of abuse, medical records showing years of injuries inconsistent with Grace's explanations. 47 photographs that Grace had taken of her own bruises and hidden on her phone. Testimony from her sisters about intervention attempts that failed. Expert witnesses who explained battered woman syndrome, the psychological damage caused by prolonged abuse, the way victims lose the ability to see alternatives. Grace took the stand on the 8th day of trial. She testified for 6 hours over 2 days, describing everything from the first blow to the last gunshot. She explained how Vincent had isolated her from her family, controlled her finances, beaten her during 3 pregnancies, and caused the miscarriages that took her children. She described waking up after surgery to learn she would never be a mother. She described discovering that her husband and her best friend had been together for years. The prosecutor asked why she did it if she knew it was wrong. Grace's answer silenced the courtroom. She said, "I couldn't carry it anymore. For years, I told myself to be strong. All I got was more pain. When I saw that gun, I didn't feel angry. I felt free, like I finally had a choice." Closing arguments came on day 11. The prosecution demanded justice for the victims. The defense asked for understanding of a woman who had endured. She said Vincent hurt her for years, but she wasn't using that as an excuse. She just wanted the pain to stop and she didn't know any other way. Judge Harold Peton delivered the sentence with words that captured the tragedy's full weight. He said the case represented tragedy on every level. He acknowledged that Grace had suffered unimaginable abuse, that the evidence was documented and undeniable, but he said the law cannot excuse premeditated violence even when born of suffering. 2 people were dead. A child would never be born. Grace's pain did not erase their loss. The sentence was 45 years in Georgia State Prison, 15 years for Vincent's voluntary manslaughter, 25 years for Janine's second-degree murder, 10 years for feticide concurrent with the murder charge, 5 years for the firearm possession consecutive. Grace would be eligible for parole after 30 years. She would be 65 years old. Grace accepted the sentence without visible emotion. She was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, past the cameras and the families and the spectators who had watched her story unfold over weeks of testimony. She didn't look back. Dorothy Bennett died in 2021, having visited her daughter in prison as often as her health allowed. She never stopped believing Grace could have been saved if someone had intervened earlier. The 3 surviving Bennett sisters established Grace's Light Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping domestic violence survivors escape before it's too late. Somewhere right now, a woman is being told to stay. Somewhere, a family is staying silent because they don't want to interfere. Somewhere, someone is reaching a breaking point. This story is not about what happens when victims fight back. It's about what happens when we ignore the violence until there's no one left to save. Thank you for watching this documentary. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Share it with someone you love. It might just save their